Hi, welcome to Miss Richardson's U.S. History 5-Minute Lectures. This information is U.S. Notes 5.18, Vietnamization. It includes information aligned with the second section on your unit's study guide. Remember, you have control over this lecture. Use your study guide to help you figure out what's important and take those notes. Pause if you need to do that, and write down any questions you have. Bring those to class to get them answered. Let's go ahead and get started. In the last set of notes, you learned about the 1968 election and that the U.S. now had a new president, Richard Nixon. He was tasked with winning, or at least ending, the war in Vietnam. This is not going to be easy for him, or for anyone. To do this, Nixon created a new policy called Vietnamization. This policy intended to end the conflict in Vietnam for the U.S., which included a gradual withdrawal of U.S. troops from Vietnam. The idea was we would shift our focus back to training South Vietnamese troops and turn the combat fighting over to them so we could pull our troops out. In addition, Nixon wanted the North Vietnamese to accept the partition of Vietnam, and he was not willing to lose any more of Asia to communism that had already fallen. So he was trying to kind of balance this. To pressure the North to accept his terms, Nixon increased aid to Saigon, the leaders of South Vietnam. He also increased air raids against the North and bombing. And then he created some plans, which were a secret at the time, to destroy northern supply lines by bombing them. These lines were actually not in Vietnam, but in Cambodia and Laos. So they would go outside of Vietnam and then come back in the south with the supplies, so their troops in the south were ready to fight. So Nixon believed that these actions would help to bring about an end to the war for the U.S. without another loss like Korea. In April of 1970, President Nixon sent American troops to clear out the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese troops from Cambodia in an action called the Invasion of Cambodia. Shocker there. This action did not have congressional consent and was in a country that was not actually a part of the conflict. Congress and most Americans questioned these actions. Some Americans even protested them. Students began a general strike to protest the invasion of Cambodia. These strikes all occurred throughout the U.S. on various campuses. However, the most famous happened on May 4th of 1970, where one particular strike became violent, which further hurt the support for the war. At Kent State University in Ohio, students were participating in a strike and protest against the U.S. government's invasion of Cambodia. National Guard troops were stationed at the campus to keep the peace and to stop any kind of unrest or rioting that might occur. The students and the National Guard clashed. Most reports agree that some of the students became violent, throwing rocks at the guardsmen. The guardsmen's reaction to this was more violence. National Guard troops opened fire on the protesters, killing 4 students and wounding 9. Not all the killed or wounded were actually protesters. Some were just students who were walking to class. Pictures of the aftermath, like those that you just saw here, graced the covers of news magazines and the national news that night. More and more Americans questioned the war and what it had done to our country. What was happening to us as a country and to the people here. So with that, the U.S. then withdrew American troops from Cambodia in June of 1970, in large part due to the public pressure after things like the Kent State Massacre. This marked the beginning of the end of the War of Vietnam. However, the final pieces still needed to be put together, which we'll look at in your next set of notes. So it's the end of 5.18. Hopefully you learned something, and if you have questions, bring those to class tomorrow.